Do you ever find yourself hijacked by irrational fears? Things that to the logical, reasonable, rational part of yourself don't seem to make any sense, and yet, nevertheless, seem to have a death grip on you? Well, if that's the case, then this video is going to shed quite a light on what's happening in these things. And when you have a sense of the underlying logic of these seemingly irrational fears, you'll find that this leads to a profound realization about yourself. So, let me say at the outset that psyche works primarily through metaphor, which is to say that when we're dealing with these irrational fears and other psychological phenomena, we don't want to take them literally. We want to see if we can see through the literal manifestations of things to the psychic backdrop behind them. And if that seems confusing, well, this first case example will make a little more sense of it. So I was working with this client who described an irrational fear she had being shot, in her own home, being shot while she's out driving. And I started to think to myself, well, okay, there's a specific reason for this. So let's say that with any psychological phenomenon, this gives us a sense of necessity, especially when there is an attribute of anxiety, fearfulness baked into it as well. So there's something necessary about being shot as opposed to any other fear that could occur to her. You'll notice that this wasn't a fear of getting in a car accident. This wasn't a fear of being mugged. This wasn't a fear of being stabbed. This was a fear of being shot. And so I asked this client of mine, I said, well, why being shot and why not being stabbed? How do these things differ? And this, if you're working with your own irrational fears, can be a very valuable practice to get specific about the nature of the fear and to draw distinctions to recognize how this particular fear is necessary, let's say, or what's necessary about this compared to that. So in my client's case, she described, well, if I was shot, I wouldn't know what to do. Whereas I know what to do if I'm stabbed. And if I'm shot, well, then I go into shock right away. Whereas you can get stabbed and continue walking around. It may just feel like a punch, but you may not know you've been stabbed. And I thought, well, okay, curious. Okay, so does this bring anything to mind for you? Can you think of a time when you didn't know what to do and you went into shock? She said, no, I mean, I don't know. Doesn't ring a bell. And I thought, okay, well, so let's tease this apart even further. What is it to be shot? What specifically happens? What are the particular details of being shot? Let's say that I'm an alien. I'm visiting Earth for the first time, and I don't know what it is to be shot. What occurs specifically when one is shot? And she said, well, I don't know how I know this, but a gun is designed for stopping power. It's meant to hit you and you stop moving. So there's stopping power. Something goes in, a bullet goes in and creates this pressure wave. And it's so intense that your body doesn't know what it means. And I thought, okay, so this fear of being shot, there's this fear of being shot. And when you are shot, then you don't know what to do about it. When you are shot, then you go into shock. When you're shot, there's stopping power. When you're shot, something goes in you. When you're shot, your body doesn't know what it means. So you don't know what to do. You go into shock. There's stopping power. Something goes in you. There's pressure. Your body doesn't know what it means. I asked her, does any of this ring a bell? Is this reminiscent of something? And I won't go into the details of her particular case, but if you let your own mind wander about what it means when something goes in you, There's pressure, it's stopping power. Your body doesn't know what it means. You don't know what to do when you go into shock. I'm willing to bet you can imagine a couple of scenarios that fit those aesthetic criteria. Those have a formal resemblance to something else that unfortunately happens to a great number of people. Now, hopefully you can see what's occurring here in the case of this particular client. Rather than remember the literal details of this scenario that she experienced years and years and years ago, she was haunted by this fear that had metaphorical resemblance to that situation. And this, we'll see, occurs with many irrational fears. There's a fascinating article written by D.W. Winnicott called The Fear of Breakdown. And the central idea of it, I highly recommend you read the article itself. It's fairly short, it's about 6 pages. The central idea, though, is of so great an importance for us if we're working with irrational fears. The central idea of the article is this: what we fear most about the future has already occurred. What we fear in the future has already happened. It's something that is too painful to remember, but too important to forget. It's something that so overwhelmed our capacities in the moment that although the event occurred, the experience of it was erased. And so a great part of what happens in psychological work is developing the capacity and developing a container in the present such that we can experience the totality of the event that occurred rather than be haunted by the traces of it, the residue of it. This is what Winnicott is getting at in The Fear of Breakdown. He says, the thing already happened. It was so overwhelming, though, that we didn't experience it. We blanked out, blocked out, and yet it left an imprint psychologically. It created shadows moving forward into the future, such that the things we fear, the things we dread, the things that horrify us to imagine, bear some metaphorical resemblance to the actual event that occurred. So part of our work is to figure out, well, what specifically is the thing that we fear, however irrational it may seem? And what are the precise qualifications of this thing that we fear? When we have a sense of that, we can look then for reminiscences, likenesses. We can get a sense of what this resembles. And we can do so in a contained setting, having built psychological capacity such that we can deal with the immensity and the intensity of the event itself. It's part of how we might work with this. Now, I'll introduce another case, another example of how we can begin to work with irrational fears. This other client of mine, he had this irrational fear of sexual betrayal. This client feared in all of his romantic relationships throughout his adult life that he would be betrayed. And not just betrayed, but sexually betrayed. And I brought up with him this similar distinction that this is a specific fear. It's not fear of somebody talking shit behind your back. This isn't fear of someone stealing your things, your valuables, stealing your identity. It's not that kind of betrayal. This is a sexual betrayal. We might wonder, what is it about a sexual betrayal? Or what are the necessary details of that differ from other possible betrayals? Just like in that first case that I discussed with you, it's fear of a gunshot, not fear of a car crash, not fear of a mugging, not fear of a stabbing, fear of being shot. So in this case, the fear is sexual betrayal. And he described, well, In a sexual betrayal, um, this is betrayal of the peak of a relationship, the pinnacle of a relationship. And I thought, well, okay. And as I was talking about it with him, we kind of hit a wall there. So I asked, well, to whom does sexual betrayal occur? Who experiences sexual betrayal? He said, well, it's someone who's a victim. And I thought, okay, well, so it's a specific sort of victim. This isn't a victim of a violent attack. This isn't a victim of again, any number of other things. This is a victim of sexual betrayal. So who or what sort of person experiences sexual betrayal? I said, well, it's someone who's unworthy. It's someone who isn't good enough. It's someone who's weak. It's someone who, oh, what else did he say? It's someone who can't hold their partner's attention, and it's someone who can't perform. I thought, okay, curious. So I can imagine then you fearing that you would be that sort of person. He said, oh, yeah, I'm afraid that I am that sort of person. I thought, wow, okay. It makes sense then why you fear sexual betrayal. If you imagine yourself to be weak, unworthy, not good enough, unable to perform, unable to hold your partner's attention, if you imagine yourself thus, well, of course, you are subject to sexual betrayal. That fear would be pervasive. So we started working in this case in a little different way. I'll give you another way you can work with this. This one is a little more future oriented rather than past oriented, as in the first case. So here I said, well, let's see if we can imagine distinctions. If the person's subject to sexual betrayal, this thing that you fear so irrationally in all of your relationships, if this person is unworthy, not good enough, weak, unable to perform, unable to hold their partner's attention, how do we contrast this? And he said, well, someone who's worthy, someone who's confident, someone who, oh, what were the others? Someone who is powerful, someone who is secure, and someone who's willing to be vulnerable, he said. So whereas the person subject to sexual betrayal is unworthy, not good enough, this is hard. This is mental gymnastics. You can see what work is involved here. Unworthy, not good enough. This is somebody who is weak, who can't perform, and who can't hold their partner's attention. If that's the sort of person who experiences sexual betrayal, this irrational fear of his, then this person is confident, is worthy. This person is secure. This person is willing to be vulnerable. This person, boy, I lost the fifth one. Anyhow, we started to imagine in this different way. So he could distinguish these are two ways of being. And if he could imagine himself in this way, well, this sort of person is not subject to sexual betrayal. This person has nothing to fear in terms of sexual betrayal. So I asked him, if you could imagine yourself worthy, confident, powerful, that's the one that I forgot. If you could imagine yourself worthy, confident, powerful, willing to be vulnerable, and secure, what scene would exemplify those attributes? What do you picture for yourself that would exemplify these attributes? And he said, boy, picturing all of that at once, I have no idea. Fair enough. It's hard enough to remember all five, let alone imagine a scene that presents all five. So let's take them one at a time. How do you imagine it looking? What do you picture? What's a scene that captures you when you are worthy? And on to the next one. What happens? What is the scene that represents you confident? On to the next. You powerful. On to the next. You, willing to be vulnerable. And then you, secure. So what we can do in this case, which is a little more future facing rather than the other case, which was a little more historical, a little more past oriented, here we can look for what's a scene that embodies, what's a scene that enacts you with these attributes. And if a person can identify a scene that embodies or enacts, a scene that captures these particular attributes of this different way of being, then through imaginal practice, they could dwell within that scene. They could work out the scene itself in all of its vivid details. So I'm just going to improvise for myself here. If I'm imagining a scene wherein I am confident, okay, what occurs there? Well, for myself at least, it's like, I could hop on and make a video. So if I'm confident, I make a video and I do so without notes. I do so really without thinking through the thing in advance. I have trust that what I say and share is going to be of value. So if I'm imagining that scene, okay, I'm confident. I set up the camera and I hit record and I start talking. And I talk and I say whatever comes to mind. And as I'm doing so, I imagine this detail and that detail. And I could work out all of the details of the scene. Now, in this kind of imaginal practice, we get a glimpse of how it would be for us to avail ourselves of that particular attribute. And when you can do this through imaginal practice, through visualizing a precisely qualified scene in all of the details that present themselves to you, you then have practice being that sort of person. And I hope the significance of this isn't lost on you. But if you've habituated yourself to experiencing life as, let's say, someone who is unworthy, not good enough, weak, um, unworthy, not good enough, weak, unable to hold their partner's attention, unable to perform. If you can imagine yourself in that scene, well, why not practice experiencing life as someone who's worthy and confident and powerful and willing to be vulnerable and secure? Having to think through what is the scene, and you can see, even as I recall this, you can see that this takes work. This takes an active investment of our attention, an active investment of our focus to hold in mind all of the particulars of the scene. The French anti-psychiatrist Félix Guattari had this beautiful line in a book called The Three Ecologies. It's translated as this: the unconscious remains bound to archaic fixations so long as it lacks an investment directing it toward the future. We remain trapped in our unconscious patterns until we can actively invest ourselves in some future. And the word invest is very curious here. I think is quite important. It's significant in a very specific way. When we actively invest our attention in the embodiment or enactment of some imaginal scene that represents us in a desired way of being, we are, just take the word invest, we are dressing ourselves in that scene. Investment shares an etymological root with, the word vest, the thing you wear, with vestments, the kind of priestly garb, which has this devotional quality to it. Boy, my mind gets away with me with all of the implications of this word investment. So we remain stuck in our habitual, unconscious, self-limiting patterns until we actively dress ourselves in some image of the future, some desired state, which we can imagine for ourselves in all of its precise qualifications through the embodiment and enactment of these particular qualities. In this client's case, things like worthy, confident, powerful, willing to be vulnerable, and secure. If that's a way of being that is not subject to this irrational fear of his, then as he works out in his imagination how it would look, how he would act, how he would sit and stand and walk and talk in that way of being, then the more proficient he is in that way of being, the less and less subject he is to this irrational fear of sexual betrayal, which then means, boy, what do you think it means for his romantic relationships if he shows up? Let's do A and B. Relationship A, he is unworthy. He's not good enough. He's weak. He can't perform. He can't hold his partner's attention. What kind of relationship dynamics does that invite? As opposed to relationship B, he is worthy, he is confident, he is powerful, willing to be vulnerable and secure. What kind of relationship dynamics ensue? So I'm getting a little carried away. I'm excited by all of this stuff. I think it's so important when we work with imaginal practice in this way, when we start to unpack the specific details of these irrational fears, we find that this not only reconstitutes the meaning of historical events, it helps us come to terms with the details of our personal history that were too much to bear at the time. It also frees the future, and in doing so, it breaks open the archaic fixations of our history and lays forth a path into a better and more beautiful future for ourselves. What more do we want? So, if you find yourself subject to irrational fears, I encourage you, get very specific about the thing feared. What is it in that fear? If it's a gunshot, why is it a fear of a gunshot and not a stabbing? How do those differ? Why is it a gunshot and not a car crash? How do those differ? Why is it a gunshot and not a mugging? How do those differ? What is it specifically? What happens in a gunshot? You can then start to look for likeness, resemblances, reminiscences. What does this bring to mind when you don't know what to do, when you're in shock, when your body doesn't know what it means, when something goes in, when there's pressure, when there's stopping power? What is that like? Or, as in this second case, who is it that is subject to this thing that you so fear? What sort of person experiences this thing that you so fear? What's a contrasting sort of person? And how do you take up the details of this contrasting sort of person such that you could embody and enact in your imagination how it would be to be in that way? Whew, I'm getting hot. There's a lot of energy moving here. So I hope this has been of tremendous value to you thus far. If this brings up questions, feel free to drop those in the comments down below. I would love to hear how you begin to work this for yourself. I hope this is a blessing for you. And before I get further and further carried away, I think I'll pause the video there. So thank you for your time and attention. I know that those are your most precious assets, and I will look forward to speaking with you again very soon.